September 15, 1940. Over the outskirts of London, a formation of nearly 60 Royal Air Force fighters races south from Duxford. It is the largest single British formation to engage the Luftwaffe during the Battle of Britain. At their head, in a Hawker Hurricane, flies squadron leader Douglas Bader. He has no legs below the knee. 9 years earlier, doctors told him he would never walk again. Now he leads 5 squadrons into the most decisive air battle of the war. In the underground bunker at RAF Uxbridge, Prime Minister Winston Churchill watches the markers move across the map and turns to his commanders. What other reserves have we? The answer comes back. There are none. But the road to this moment had begun 9 years earlier, on a cold December afternoon at a small airfield near Reading. On the 14th of December, 1931, Pilot Officer Douglas Bader was 21 years old and convinced he was invincible. He had been commissioned into the Royal Air Force just 18 months earlier, after graduating from the RAF College at Cranwell. Posted to No. 23 Squadron at Kenley in Surrey, he flew Gloucester Gamecocks and then Bristol Bulldogs. He was a natural in the cockpit. He was also reckless beyond measure. Bader had developed a taste for aerobatics that bordered on obsession. He performed at the prestigious RAF display at Hendon. He pushed his aircraft to its limits, and often beyond. Strict orders forbade unauthorized aerobatics below 2,000 feet. 7 out of 23 accidents caused by ignoring such regulations had proven fatal. Bader took the rule as an unnecessary restriction rather than an order to be obeyed. That December afternoon, he flew to Woodley Airfield near Reading to visit the local aero club. After lunch, someone issued a challenge. The accounts vary on exactly what was said, but the essence was clear. A dare. Roll the aircraft at ground level. Bader climbed into Bristol Bulldog K-1676 and took off. He began a slow roll at impossibly low altitude. The Bulldog was fast for its time, but had directional stability problems at low speeds. It was the worst possible aircraft for such a stunt. The left wingtip touched the grass. The aircraft cartwheeled and crumpled into a shapeless ball of twisted metal. Strapped in the crushed cockpit, Bader heard nothing but a terrible noise. He was bloodied and semi-conscious when rescuers pried him from the wreckage with a hacksaw. They laid him on a stretcher and offered him a glass of brandy. "No, thanks very much," Bader said casually. "I do not drink." He was rushed by ambulance to the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading. Surgeon J. Leonard Joyce fought to save his life. The right leg was amputated that same day. The left leg followed several days later. One amputation was above the knee. The other was below. Bader nearly died. When he finally stabilized, he made a laconic entry in his flight logbook. Crashed slow rolling near ground. Bad show. The months that followed tested everything Douglas Bader was made of. He endured a long and agonizing convalescence, requiring morphine for the relentless pain. In 1932, he was transferred to the hospital at RAF Uxbridge and fitted with a new pair of artificial legs. They were made of metal and leather, crude by later standards, one leg attached above the knee, the other below. Walking on them was excruciating. Bader refused to accept the limitations others placed on him. Within 6 months of the crash, he was walking unaided. He learned to drive a specially modified car. He took up golf and attacked the game with the same ferocity he had brought to flying. He would eventually achieve a handicap of 4, a mark of genuine skill. He learned to dance despite the pain and awkwardness of his artificial limbs. He was determined to prove that the loss of his legs had taken nothing essential from him. On the 27th of November 1933, nearly 2 years after the accident, Bader flew solo again. He climbed into an Avro Tudor biplane and took off from the airfield. Once airborne, he could not resist the temptation. He turned the aircraft upside down at 600 feet inside the circuit area. It was precisely the kind of reckless stunt that had cost him his legs in the first place. But this time he landed safely. Bader passed his flight check. He requested reactivation as a pilot. The medical board faced an unprecedented case. No pilot had ever returned to active flying duty after losing both legs. They studied his file. They observed his competence. And then they ruled that he could not continue as an RAF pilot. The decision devastated him. Bader was medically retired with a 100% disability pension. The career he had fought so hard to reclaim was over before it could resume. He was 23 years old. He took a job with the Asiatic Petroleum Company, which would later become Shell, working in their aviation department. It was respectable work, it was not flying. For a man who had defined himself by what he could do in the cockpit, the years that followed were a kind of exile. But Europe was changing. Throughout the late 1930s, the storm clouds gathered. Adolf Hitler rebuilt German military power in open defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany remilitarized the Rhineland, annexed Austria, and swallowed Czechoslovakia piece by piece. War was coming. Everyone could feel it. Bader petitioned repeatedly to rejoin the Royal Air Force. Each time he was offered ground jobs. Each time he refused. He did not want to push papers. He wanted to fly. On the 3rd of September 1939, Britain declared war on Nazi Germany. Bader later recalled his reaction. "They will have to have me now." He was right. Using his connections from his Cranwell days, Bader finally forced his way back into the service. He passed flight tests at the Central Flying School. His rating came back as exceptional. In January 1940, he was posted to No. 19 Squadron based at RAF Duxford near Cambridge. At 29, he was older than most of his fellow pilots. Squadron leader Geoffrey Stevenson, a close friend from his Cranwell days, was the commanding officer. It was at Duxford that Bader got his first glimpse of a Supermarine Spitfire. By February, he was flying one. The theory among some pilots held that Bader's disability might actually give him an advantage in combat. When pilots pulled high G-forces in tight turns, blood drained from the brain to the lower extremities, especially the legs. This often caused blackouts at critical moments. Bader had no lower legs for the blood to drain into. Whether the theory was accurate or not, Bader was about to prove himself in combat. In May 1940, the German Blitzkrieg smashed through the Low Countries and into France. The British Expeditionary Force was driven back to the beaches at Dunkirk. Between the 26th of May and the 4th of June, over 300,000 Allied soldiers were evacuated across the English Channel in a desperate flotilla of military vessels, fishing boats, and civilian craft. Bader, now a flight commander with No. 222 Squadron, flew Spitfires over the evacuation. On the 1st of June 1940, he scored his first aerial victory, shooting down a Messerschmitt Bf 109 over the French coast. He also damaged a Heinkel 111 bomber. Days later, he nearly collided with a Dornier 17 while trying to fire on its rear gunner. It was reckless. It was effective. It was pure Bader. The Battle of France was lost, but Douglas Bader had proven he could fight. On the 28th of June 1940, Bader was posted to command No. 242 Squadron as acting squadron leader. It was a Hawker Hurricane unit based at RAF Colditz in Norfolk. On paper, it should have been a prestigious command. In reality, it was a shambles. The squadron was composed mainly of Canadian pilots who had fought in France and been badly mauled. They had suffered heavy losses. Morale had collapsed. When Bader arrived, he found pilots who were demoralized, undisciplined, and deeply skeptical of their new commanding officer. A legless squadron leader was not what they had expected or wanted. Bader did not care what they expected. He attacked the squadron's problems with the same aggressive determination he brought to everything else. He cut through red tape to get the aircraft and equipment they needed. He demanded excellence and refused to accept excuses. His strong personality wore down the Canadians. Resistance. Pilots like Willie McKnight, Stan Turner, and Dickie Cork found themselves won over despite their initial doubts. By August 1940, No. 242 Squadron had been transformed into an effective fighting force. Douglas Bader had rebuilt it through sheer force of will. He would need every one of those pilots for what was coming. The Battle of Britain was about to begin, and Bader, the legless squadron leader who had fought his way back from a hospital bed, was about to become the most controversial figure in RAF Fighter Command. On the 10th of July 1940, the Battle of Britain officially began. It would become the first major military campaign in history fought entirely in the air. The fate of nations would be decided not by armies clashing on fields, but by young men in cockpits dueling miles above the earth. The German strategy was straightforward in concept, if brutal in execution. Adolf Hitler had issued Führer Directive No. 16 on the 16th of July, calling for preparations for Operation Sea Lion, the amphibious invasion of Britain. But the Wehrmacht's generals understood the reality. They could not ferry troops across the English Channel while the Royal Navy controlled those waters. And the Royal Navy could not be neutralized while the Royal Air Force controlled the skies above. The Luftwaffe would have to destroy Fighter Command before any invasion could proceed. The RAF met this threat with one of the most sophisticated air defense systems ever devised. Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding commanded Fighter Command from his headquarters at Bentley Priory. He was 68 years old, stubborn, difficult to work with, and utterly brilliant. Before the war, when the Air Ministry believed that bombers would always get through and that fighter defense was futile, Dowding had argued otherwise. He championed the development of radar. He insisted on accumulating modern fighters. He created a system of sector stations and operations rooms that could direct squadrons to intercept incoming raids with unprecedented precision. It was called the Dowding System, and it would save Britain. Fighter Command was divided into 4 geographical groups. Number 11 Group, commanded by Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, covered London and the southeast. This was the hot zone, the front line where German bombers, escorted by Messerschmitt fighters, would strike day after day. Park was a New Zealander, a veteran of the Great War, and one of the most experienced fighter tacticians outside Germany. His approach was methodical and conservative. He scrambled squadrons individually based on radar information, sending small, flexible formations to intercept the enemy quickly. His mantra was simple. It was better to upset the aim of many than to destroy a few. Number 12 Group, commanded by Air Vice Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory, covered the Midlands and the industrial north. Before the war, planners had expected German attacks to come from bases in Germany across the North Sea, which would have made 12 Group the front line. But Hitler's conquest of France had changed everything. With Luftwaffe bases now in northwestern France, London was within range of German fighter escorts. 11 Group bore the brunt of the assault. 12 Group found itself in a supporting role, tasked with defending its own sector and covering 11 Group's airfields when requested. For Douglas Bader, commanding 242 Squadron in 12 Group, this secondary role was intolerable. Through July and into August, 11 Group's pilots fought daily over southern England and the Channel. They scrambled at dawn. They flew sortie after sortie. They watched friends die and climbed back into their cockpits the next morning. Meanwhile, 12 Group sat largely idle at Duxford, flying convoy protection patrols, chasing the occasional German reconnaissance aircraft, and waiting for requests to reinforce 11 Group that rarely seemed to come. Bader raged against the inaction. He was not built for patience. He had not clawed his way back from a hospital bed to sit on the ground while other men fought the decisive battle of the war. In mid-August, 11 Group finally requested assistance from 12 Group. German attacks on RAF airfields had intensified. Park needed help protecting his bases while his fighters engaged the incoming raids. Leigh-Mallory dispatched his squadrons. They arrived too late. The airfields were already burning. The recriminations began immediately. 11 Group accused 12 Group of reacting too slowly. 12 Group countered that the request for assistance had come too late. The truth was probably somewhere in between. But the incident opened a rift between Park and Leigh-Mallory that would have consequences far beyond the battle itself. On the 30th of August, 11 Group called for help again. This time, Bader led 242 squadrons south and successfully intercepted German bombers and their escorts. It was his first experience of a mass German raid, the kind of large-scale engagement that 11 Group faced daily. After the action, Bader filed his combat report and then made his views known to anyone who would listen. Had more fighters been under his command, he argued, more damage could have been inflicted on the enemy. The logic seemed obvious to him. Why send 12 aircraft when you could send 36? Why attack in penny packets when you could hit the Germans with an overwhelming force? Lee Mallory listened. He had no personal experience as a fighter pilot, but he understood the political dimensions of the argument. Here was an opportunity for 12 Group to play a greater role in the battle. Here was a chance to demonstrate that his approach might be superior to Park's. On the 7th of September 1940, everything changed. Hitler, frustrated by the Luftwaffe's failure to destroy fighter command and enraged by RAF bombing raids on Berlin, ordered a shift in strategy. Instead of attacking RAF airfields and radar stations, the Luftwaffe would now concentrate on bombing London. The Blitz had begun. That same day, Bader led a 3-squadron formation from Duxford into action for the first time. 242 Squadron was joined by 310 Squadron, a Czech unit, and 19 Squadron flying Spitfires. They called it the Duxford Wing. It was Bader's brainchild, and Lee Mallory had authorized it. The first engagement was not a success. The wing was caught climbing for altitude by Messerschmitt 109s before it could reach the bombers. The formation became scattered. The results were mixed at best. But Lee Mallory was not discouraged. He added 2 more squadrons, 302 Polish Squadron and 611 Squadron. The Duxford Wing became the Big Wing. 5 squadrons, up to 60 aircraft, the largest fighter formation fighter command had ever assembled. Over the following days, the Big Wing went into action repeatedly. Its combat claims were extraordinary, far exceeding those of 11 Group's individual squadrons. Bader and his pilots reported destroying dozens of German aircraft. The numbers suggested that mass formations were devastatingly effective. But the numbers were wrong. Post-war analysis would reveal that the Big Wing overclaimed by as much as 7-1. In the chaos of large-scale air combat, with dozens of fighters attacking the same bomber formations, multiple pilots claimed the same kills. Aircraft seen trailing smoke were reported as destroyed when they actually limped home to France. The fog of war distorted everything. At the time, however, no one knew this. The inflated claims made the Big Wing look like a triumph. They made Park's tactics look inadequate by comparison. And they gave Lee Mallory ammunition in his growing conflict with Dowding and Park. The controversy cut to the heart of how fighter command should fight the battle. Park argued that there was no time to assemble large formations when German raids could cross the Channel in minutes. By the time a Big Wing formed up, the bombs would already have fallen. Worse, if the wing was sent to the wrong location, there would be nothing in reserve to meet the enemy elsewhere. Dowding agreed. The system he had built depended on flexibility and speed, not massed formations. Bader dismissed these concerns. He believed that meeting the enemy in overwhelming strength was worth the extra time required to assemble. He lobbied his views to anyone who would listen, including politicians and Air Ministry officials. Lee Mallory encouraged him. Dowding later said that Bader was the cause of a lot of the trouble, but he also acknowledged that Bader was not personally disloyal. He genuinely believed in his tactics. He was a fighter pilot who wanted to fight in the most aggressive way possible. That others were using his arguments to advance their own agendas was something Bader either did not see or chose to ignore. By mid-September, the battle had reached its crisis point. August 31st had been Fighter Command's worst day. German intelligence believed the RAF was on its last legs. Hermann Göring assured Hitler that one more massive blow would finish the British. On the 15th of September, the Luftwaffe would deliver that blow, and Douglas Bader's Big Wing would fly into history. Sunday, the 15th of September, 1940. Dawn broke clear over southern England. It was the 8th consecutive day of German bombing raids on London. In Berlin, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring believed victory over the Royal Air Force was finally at hand. Today, he decreed, would be the day his glorious Luftwaffe would break the back of Fighter Command's stubborn resistance. German bomber crews were told they would face only the tattered remnant of an almost defeated British fighter force. A few more blows, and the RAF would cease to exist. By 11 o'clock that morning, British radar stations began picking up massive formations assembling over the Pas de Calais. Hundreds of German aircraft were heading across the English Channel toward London. Dornier 17 bombers, Heinkel 111s, Junkers 88s. All escorted by swarms of Messerschmitt 109 fighters. At the underground headquarters of No. 11 Group at RAF Uxbridge, Air Vice Marshal Keith Park watched the markers move across the plotting table. Each marker represented a German formation. Each formation meant death, falling from the sky onto British cities. Park began scrambling his squadrons, 2 over Canterbury, 4 over Biggin Hill and Maidstone, 2 more over Chelmsford at 15,000 feet. One by one, the squadrons of 11 Group rose to meet the enemy over Kent. Prime Minister Winston Churchill had arrived at the bunker that morning to observe the battle. He stood in the operations room, watching as the women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force moved the markers with their long plotting rods. The situation board showed squadron after squadron committed to the fight. The colored lights indicated which units were in the air, which were engaging the enemy, which were returning to refuel. Churchill turned to Park. "What other reserves have we?" Park's reply was quiet. "There are none." Every available pilot and machine in 11 Group had been committed. If the Germans broke through, there was nothing left to stop them. But Park had one more card to play. Despite his reservations about Lee Mallory's tactics, he sent the order to Stanmore at 11:20. It was time to test the big wing. At RAF Duxford, the scramble order came through. Squadron leader Douglas Bader led his pilots to their aircraft at a run. Engines roared to life across the airfield. No. 242 Squadron in their Hurricanes, No. 302 Polish Squadron, and No. 310 Czechoslovak Squadron, also in Hurricanes, No. 19 Squadron, and No. 611 Squadron in Spitfires. 5 squadrons. Nearly 60 aircraft. The largest single British fighter formation of the Battle of Britain. Bader's Hurricane lifted off and climbed hard. The big wing assembled over Duxford before noon. The 3 Hurricane squadrons formed up at 25,000 feet. The 2 Spitfire squadrons climbed higher still, to 27,000 feet, positioning themselves between the Hurricanes and the sun. They proceeded south, directed toward the enemy by the black puffs of anti-aircraft fire rising over Kent. The plan was elegant. Arrive with height advantage. Attack out of the sun. Fall on the German bombers with overwhelming force before their escorts could react. But war rarely respects elegant plans. The big wing arrived between Kenley and Maidstone at varying altitudes, somewhere between 15 and 16,000 feet. They emerged from cloud directly into the German bomber stream, and above them, waiting, was Jagdgeschwader 26, Adolf Galland's fighters. In a reversal of their intended roles, the Hurricanes found themselves engaging the Messerschmitt 109s while the Spitfires went for the bombers. The carefully planned formation attack dissolved into what Bader would later describe as a confusing mess. Individual dogfights erupted across miles of sky. Aircraft twisted and turned, trying to get on each other's tails. Tracer rounds stitched bright lines through the air. No. 310 Squadron lost 2 Hurricanes to Jagdgeschwader 26. One of them fell to Adolf Galland himself. The German ace was adding to his score even as his comrades, bombers, came under attack. By 1440, the German bombers reached London. Bombs fell on Battersea, carving runs 500 yards long and 25 yards wide through civilian housing. Rail lines were cut in several places. A viaduct collapsed over the tracks. But the Dornier formation had been savaged. What had begun as a full-strength bombing force was reduced to 15 aircraft by the time they turned for home. Most of those were damaged. The big wing had not worked as planned, but it had worked. Bader's assessment, recorded in the combat report, was characteristically blunt. It was the finest shambles I have been in, since for once we had position, height, and numbers. Enemy aircraft were a dirty-looking collection. The German formations limped back across the channel. By 1300 hours, the last enemy aircraft were plotted heading for France. The morning battle was over. But there was no time to rest. RAF fighters raced back to their airfields to refuel and rearm. Ground crews worked frantically, pumping fuel into tanks and loading ammunition belts while pilots scribbled their combat reports. At Duxford, only 49 of the big wing's 56 fighters were still operational. Battle damage had taken its toll. Just after 1400 hours, the radar stations detected another enemy formation crossing the French coast. This one was even larger than the morning wave. Bader's wing scrambled again. This time, they had the altitude they needed. This time, they arrived over the target directly, positioned perfectly to attack. Nearly 60 Royal Air Force fighters approached in parade formation, arranged in a display of strength that was visible for miles. The German bomber crews saw them coming. These were the same crews who had been told that Fighter Command was finished. They had fought their way through Spitfires and Hurricanes over Kent that morning and been assured those were the last reserves the British possessed. Now, over the outskirts of London, they watched as wave after wave of British fighters descended on them. The psychological impact was devastating. Post-war analysis described it as an implosion of confidence on the German side. The massed formation made a lot of fighters look like one heck of a lot. Whether the big wing was tactically sound mattered less in that moment than what it represented. The RAF was not beaten. The RAF was not even close to beaten. As their Messerschmitt 109 escorts began to run low on fuel and turned for home, the German bombers were left to fend for themselves. They were savaged. Dorniers fell burning from the sky. Others staggered back toward France, trailing smoke. By late afternoon, it was over. The British press would claim 185 German aircraft shot down. The actual figure was closer to 56 or 60 aircraft and approximately 150 aircrew. The RAF had lost fewer than 30 aircraft and 13 pilots killed. The numbers on both sides had been exaggerated in the chaos of combat, but the reality was clear to everyone who mattered. German High Command understood immediately that the reports of Fighter Command's impending demise had been greatly exaggerated. The RAF was still very much in business. It was not going to be destroyed before autumn weather made an invasion impossible. 2 days later, on the 17th of September 1940, Adolf Hitler ordered Operation Sea Lion postponed until further notice. The ships and barges that had been concentrated at ports along the French coast began to disperse. The threat of invasion diminished with each passing day. The Battle of Britain would continue into October. The Luftwaffe would shift to night bombing, beginning the campaign that became known as the Blitz. But the decisive daylight battle for air superiority had been won. Britain would not be invaded. The war would go on. September the 15th would be commemorated ever after as Battle of Britain Day. Douglas Bader had led the largest fighter formation of the battle into combat on its most critical day. Whether his tactics were sound would be debated for decades. What could not be debated was that he had been there, at the head of his squadrons, when it mattered most. He would be promoted to wing commander. He would be celebrated as a hero. He would be sent back into the fight over occupied France. But his greatest trials were still ahead. The 15th of September marked the turning point, but it did not end the controversy. In the weeks that followed, the big wing was used only intermittently. The Luftwaffe had shifted to night bombing, and the massive daylight formations that had made Bader's tactics possible became less frequent. The battle wound down through October, and by the end of the month, the Germans had effectively conceded defeat. Operation Sea Lion was postponed indefinitely. Britain would not be invaded. But within Fighter Command, a different battle was just beginning. On the 17th of October 1940, a conference was convened at the Air Ministry. The official purpose was to discuss fighter tactics. In reality, it was something closer to a trial. Lee, Mallory, and Bader argued forcefully that the big-wing tactics had proven superior. They pointed to the extraordinary claims from September, the dozens of German aircraft supposedly destroyed. Park and Dowding defended their approach, insisting that the Dowding system had won the battle and that mass formations were too slow and inflexible for the conditions 11 Group faced. The politics were brutal. Lee Mallory had cultivated allies in the Air Ministry, including Air Marshal Sholto Douglas, who had long been critical of Dowding. The big wing's inflated claims, not yet exposed as overcounts, gave the critics ammunition. Dowding's prickly personality and Park's bluntness had made them enemies in the corridors of power. By the end of 1940, both men were gone. Sholto Douglas replaced Dowding as head of Fighter Command. Lee Mallory took over 11 Group from Park. The architects of victory were pushed aside. The proponents of tactics that post-war analysis would judge as flawed had won the political war. Winston Churchill was furious when he learned how Dowding had been treated. The Air Ministry wrote an official history of the Battle of Britain without even mentioning Dowding's name. Churchill intervened to ensure Dowding was elevated to the peerage as Lord Dowding of Bentley Priory. But the damage was done. The men who had saved Britain were gone, and Douglas Bader, however, unwittingly, had played a role in their removal. Bader himself continued to rise. In December 1940, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. In March 1941, he was promoted to wing commander and became one of the RAF's first wing leaders. He was posted to RAF Tangmere in West Sussex and given command of 3 Spitfire squadrons. The Tangmere wing would become one of the most famous formations in Fighter Command. The RAF was now going on the offensive. With the immediate threat of invasion past, Fighter Command shifted from defense to attack. Circus operations sent bombers escorted by massive fighter formations to strike targets in occupied France, hoping to lure Luftwaffe fighters into battle and tie them down in the west. Rhubarb sorties sent pairs of fighters on low-level sweeps to shoot up targets of opportunity. The goal was to take the war to the enemy. Bader threw himself into the new campaign with characteristic aggression. His call sign was Dog's Body, derived from his initials. The Tangmere wing's unofficial motto was return tickets only. His leadership style remained unorthodox. He cracked jokes over the radio during missions. He made irreverent comments to ease his pilots' tension. He even smoked his pipe in the cockpit, despite the insanity of lighting a match in an aircraft using oxygen. His seeming indestructibility became legendary. Wing Commander Johnny Johnson, who flew with Bader and would become the RAF's top-scoring ace, later wrote that invisible threads of trust and comradeship held them together. The mantle of Bader's leadership, Johnson said, would sustain and protect them throughout the fight ahead. By August 1941, Bader's personal score had risen to 22 or 23 confirmed victories. He was the 5th highest-scoring ace in the Royal Air Force. He seemed untouchable. On the 9th of August 1941, his luck ran out. Bader was leading the Tangmere wing on a fighter sweep over northern France, near Bethune. He spotted a formation of 12 Messerschmitt 109s below him and attacked. He shot down at least 1, possibly 2. Then, something went wrong. What exactly happened remains disputed to this day. Some accounts suggest a mid-air collision with a German fighter. Others point to possible friendly fire. The circumstances have never been definitively established. What is certain is that the rear half of Bader's Spitfire was torn away. The aircraft began to fall. Bader tried to bail out. His right prosthetic leg became trapped in the fuselage. He pulled the ripcord on his parachute, and the force of it opening snapped the leather straps holding the leg to his body. "My right leg was no longer with me," Bader later recalled. "The leather belt which attached it to my body had broken under the strain, and the leg, the Spitfire, and eye had all parted company. He descended under his parachute and was knocked unconscious on landing. When he woke, 2 German soldiers were removing his parachute harness. Douglas Bader, the legless ace who had fought his way back from a hospital bed to become one of Britain's most celebrated pilots, was a prisoner of war. The irony was not lost on him. He was taken to a hospital in Saint-Omer. It was the same area where his father had died after being wounded in 1917. The Germans treated their famous captive with respect. Word of Bader's capture spread quickly through Luftwaffe circles. Lieutenant Colonel Adolf Galland, commander of Jagdgeschwader 26 and one of Germany's leading aces, sent an invitation. Bader was picked up in a staff car and driven to Galland's airfield at Wissant. The 2 men had fought against each other in the skies. Now they met as rivals and, in time, as something approaching friends. Galland hosted Bader at a tea party with his pilots. He offered the British ace a tin of captured English tobacco. He even allowed Bader to sit in the cockpit of a Messerschmitt 109. Bader studied the controls. Then he looked at Galland and asked if he might take the aircraft for a flight around the airfield. Galland laughed and refused. A German officer standing nearby had a pistol trained on their guest the entire time. The matter of Bader's missing leg presented a unique problem. Galland contacted the British through the International Red Cross and offered safe passage for the RAF to drop a replacement prosthetic. Hermann Göring himself approved the operation. On the 19th of August, 6 Bristol Blenheim bombers with a substantial fighter escort flew to Saint-Omer under a temporary ceasefire. A new prosthetic leg was parachuted to the Luftwaffe base. The Germans were rather less impressed when the bombers, their humanitarian mission complete, proceeded to attack Gosnay Power Station. Bad weather prevented them from hitting the target, but the point was made. The British were not about to waste an opportunity. Bader had no intention of remaining a prisoner. He had vowed to be, in his own words, a plain, bloody nuisance to the Germans. He meant it. With his new leg, he began planning escape almost immediately. His first attempt came from the hospital itself. A French nurse named Lucille de Backer helped him tie bed sheets together into a rope. Bader lowered himself from a window, hobbled through the darkness to a peasant's house, and waited for the French resistance to smuggle him out. Another woman at the hospital betrayed him. He was recaptured. It would not be his last attempt. Transferred to prisoner of war camps, Bader became an incorrigible escape artist. He tunneled. He joined working parties and slipped away toward the Polish border. He defied and insulted his captors at every opportunity. The Germans eventually resorted to confiscating his artificial legs at night to prevent him from escaping. After escape attempts from Stalag Luft 3 and Stalag Luft 8B at Lambsdorff, the Germans decided they had had enough. In August 1942, Bader was transferred to Colditz Castle, the infamous Oflag 4C, which housed the most troublesome prisoners in German captivity. When informed of the transfer, Bader demanded to travel first class and to be accompanied by a batman and an officer of equal rank. Colditz was considered escape-proof. Bader remained there for nearly 3 years, continuing to make life difficult for his captors but unable to get out. On the 16th of April 1945, the 1st United States Army liberated Colditz Castle. Douglas Bader walked out of captivity after 3 years and 8 months as a prisoner of war. He was flown home in a twin-engine Avro Anson and reunited with his wife Thelma. The war in Europe ended 3 weeks later. On the 15th of September 1945, the 5th anniversary of the day that saved Britain, Douglas Bader wound a blue polka-dot scarf around his neck and climbed into the cockpit of a Spitfire. He led a formation of 300 aircraft over London in the first Battle of Britain flyover. The legless pilot who had once been told he would never walk again now led the victory parade across the sky. He retired from the Royal Air Force in February 1946 with the rank of Group Captain. He returned to Shell Oil, flew goodwill missions around the world, and devoted much of his remaining life to advocating for amputees and the disabled. In 1976, he was knighted for his services to disabled people. Sir Douglas Bader died on the 5th of September, 1982. He was 72 years old. His logbook entry from that December day in 1931 had read, simply, crashed, slow rolling near ground. Bad show. What followed was anything but.